Good morning, Sandy. How are you?
Morning, Amy. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I'm so looking forward to our topic today. I've been thinking about it all week, and I have had some things happening this week that I was like, okay, how
Good.
am I doing here with assuming positive intentions, which is our topic today. How to assume positive intentions.
I'm sorry, I was Googling right
So,
before because I thought of back to your research. I'm like, oh gosh, I remember writing a blog about this, and
did
Cheryl
you?
Strait has some good things. And I thought, oh, I need to bring that up too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
love the subject. Love the reminder. It's such a great reminder of how to look at other people and situations and start from a clean slate. So yeah.
Right. So I read something in all of my research, and I've got some things to challenge this. I've got some
Okay.
things to support this, and some research or thoughts to challenge it. First thought though is this: we judge ourselves according to our intentions because we know our intentions.
Mhm.
Okay, we judge others by their behavior and we assume their intentions.
That makes a ton of sense. And
I
that's a
know.
lot of times how we get in bad places, but we don't, many times, don't know their intentions. So we
Right.
guess and we do it based off of their behavior. So we're not horrible human beings for doing this. It's just our natural inclination. But I
Oh,
guess that,
totally. Yeah.
so trying to find out somebody's intention, I guess that's part of the point of this is you don't always, so you just have to assume positive.
Right. 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 And when we assume positive, um, like the experience from that is so here's a question for you. We are taught to be cautious. And evolutionary, we're taught to watch out for threats. I mean, that's like when you see a threat, you're supposed to, push it away. And sometimes when people behave badly, we push it away because we see it as a threat.
Mhm.
So, how are you on the scale of assuming positive intent or negative intent and pushing away
I think
negative
by
things?
by nature, I am positive. So the positive intent is natural unless I have a bias. And I find that when I have biases, they can be kind of deep because I've I've grown to accept them. So I say, I guess I'm playing both sides here because if I don't have a natural bias, I definitely assume positive intent. But if I have a bias that came from experience, that came from, an example would be go back so using the experience is working so long in the financial world and at the CPA firm and meeting with so many people. Uh, I have a bias, maybe how they're dressed, how they carry themselves on what their financials are going to look like, making quick to judgments on, oh, flashy, flashy. Wait till we see their tax return. There's not going to be anything on there, that type of a thing. Because I have a bias against what I think they're going to be like, or I assume they're going to be a client that I don't really want to work with because I don't like that sort of person. So that'd be an example of me having a bias and not going immediately toward positive intent. I'll go to negative intent.
Yeah.
Do you have similar, where are you at on this, Amy? Are you positive, negative?
Um, so I tend to be more positive intent. I tend to assume positive intent. Um, I I think sometimes it gets me in trouble. I'll
Mhm.
just say that because sometimes the intent is not
Right.
positive and the behavior keeps repeating itself. And then I have to like say, all right, this is obviously, I made the wrong assumption. This is not positive intent. This is a another issue. And so, but I will tell you, my dad, I remember he was very cautious. he tended to be more, um, I wouldn't say negative intent, but he was more objective. Like he was more balanced in his perceptions. And there's this one thing that happened when I think I was in high school or early college. I don't remember. I was in a parking lot with my dad's old beat up truck that he let me drive. And I remember I backed into another car in the parking lot, a parked car. And I, couldn't tell. It was a beat up old car. So couldn't tell if I'd left anything. I was in a beat up old car, but I left a note on the windshield and said, this was before cell phones taking
Right.
photos and all that. So it was like, I
And
left a note on the
before,
windshield.
and before
Okay.
cameras, when you back up, and beepers.
Right. Exactly. So I left a note on the windshield with my name, my phone number, and said, call. I just kind of bumped your car. I couldn't tell. I don't think I did anything, but Well, I got home and I was telling my dad that story, and he was like, oh my gosh, what did you do? They could come and say you totaled their car. And, he's like, you wrote a note saying you hit their car. Okay. So, end of the story, they never called. Okay. So, I'm just going to say that. So I see his point of view, but my person was, I need to be honest about this. I need to do this. So I see that, and I assumed positive outcome through his experience in life and knowing what could happen. And so since they never called, I think my positive, assuming positive intent was solidified. Like, oh, see, I was right. So does that make sense? I think that was kind of a pivotal thing that happened when I
Here's me listening to that story. I think you did the right thing. And my dad is much like your dad. And I can see him having the same answer, which is good, because the challenging of the thought process is always a good one. But I have a simplistic rule that I put on myself, and that is, if in the situation I was videotaped and later had to watch myself on videotape, what would I think would be the right or wrong thing to do, showing that? And that's in words and in actions. And I think if you got caught on videotape and later they said, Amy, why didn't you say anything, or did say, you knew the right thing to do was reenacting that to leave a note. Even though I love the challenge of your dad, because my dad does that to me a lot, or he has over the years, with relationships, with decisions, with both people I put in my life, and how I decide to spend my time. And it sometimes, it definitely makes me pause, and that's good. And it sometimes makes me rethink the situation, which is good too. A challenge is a good thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I had never heard this assume positive intentions or intent until my sister. I got to give her credit for this. My kids were little, and little kids do naughty things, and you get frustrated with them, right? Like that's they are exploring the world, and they're doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing sometimes, and parents get frustrated. And my sister, who's a teacher, thankfully, and I don't know if she got this because she's a teacher, but I give her a little bit of credit because she has experience with children. She said to me, she's like, Amy, in every encounter with your kids, you need to assume positive intent. And that really flipped things upside down for me with my children, because I was assuming that, they're climbing on top of the counters because, they're trying to make me crazy, or they're just, instead of, oh, they're climbing up on the counters because they're trying to reach the cup and be independent. Like there was not, I'm just going to say, when I had 4 little kids, there was no assuming of positive intent.
Right. But you're also trying to control the situation and keep your lives flowing and moving the way they should. There's a lot of outlier things there, but what great advice she gave to you. And there's something about the phrase assuming positive intent and thinking it through that does resonate, because with me, it was reading a Cheryl Strayed book, and I'm not sure which one because I've read several of hers and I was Googling it, trying to find which one, but she told the story of her first job was as a counselor at a youth, for youth that were at risk. I mean, they were basically naughty kids, right? I'm trying to think of the right word, but they were kids that were there because they had issues. And she jumped to some conclusion and judgment on a couple of the kids that were a bit mouthy, looked a certain way. And she got pulled aside by the manager and said, you need to assume positive intent. That's the only way to give these kids a break. And sometimes, when by assuming positive intent, you're going to get the better out of them. They know when you're not assuming positive intent. And think about somebody that is at risk, maybe hasn't made the best choices, bad decisions. Think about how liberating that is to have someone that doesn't jump to judgment on you and that does assume that positive intent. We've all been in situations where we've gone down the rabbit hole of bad. Maybe it's something we've said, something we've done, and it's so uplifting to have someone look at you that way and give you that grace. And you know it right away. That's the other thing, is it. It's very obvious to you when you're not being judged and you're not being immediately looked at negatively. So what a blessing both ways. But it's not that easy of words. Back to your point with your dad. If only we could just say, there it is, I'm going to recite it. It's not black and white either, but it is a beautiful grace to give.
It is. It's like giving someone a clean slate and just saying, here, start over. I'm disregarding what I've heard about you and what's happened in the past, and here's your clean slate. And until you do something that shows me otherwise, I'm going to assume positive intent.
And I think you make a great point there. I've been thinking a lot about this because there is a fine line between assuming positive intent initially and keeping with it forever. And my point is back to what you just said on, how long do you do that? There is a point where if the experience, the actions do not support that positive intent, you got to run like hell too.
Right.
In some situations, I'm being facetious, but it is not assume positive intent forever. That is put your bias down, put away your judgment, allow them the grace to be or do what they want, and then it's all on them. But you don't have to assume that forever, and you shouldn't, because that's where we get into trouble, I think, too. I think that's the flip side, is we get in trouble by always assuming a positive intent. And I think we both have known people in our lives that do that, and they get themselves in trouble with that, because assuming positive intent puts you and the other person on a fair playing field for actions to play out that are real. And you can judge intention because it's by what you're seeing and experiencing. But then you also have to make a call on whether they have shown up, right? Whether they deserve that positive, or if they're doing negative things, you got to be able to walk away. It's not a forever thing.
Completely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because as I was thinking about assuming positive intent this week, and I was going through some things, I've had some car issues this week, and I've had to deal with a couple of different entities telling me two different things to try to get this resolved.
This isn't Hallmark cards.
So when you brought that up, as I was approaching these situations and I was trying to assume positive intent, but I had a little bit of some facts behind that. I was thinking, am I approaching this as conflict avoidance? Because if I assume positive intent, that means there's no conflict. And so I had to, and you know me, I like to avoid conflict. I like peace. That's one of my core values. So I'm like, no conflict, please. Let's just keep the peace. Um, but I I had to state some facts. And I'm like, these are the facts. This is what happened. And and I on Friday, so I'm just going to tell you, I got the wrong windshield put in my car in August when I needed a new windshield, and I needed a windshield with the heater, and I got one in without a heater. And now it's cold, and my car has alarms going off because it's the wrong windshield. Okay.
Mhm.
So the fact is that somebody put the wrong windshield in August, and it didn't have, there's a plug to plug it in for the heater. It didn't have that plug. And one person, at least one person knew that, and they just moved forward and said, nobody's going to catch this until the fall. So I'm just going to keep going, whatever. I
Which is
don't know
bad
what,
intent.
which was, there was at least one person that had bad intent in this. And so, dealing with the frustration through the week, and that's still not fixed on Friday afternoon. And I'm talking to the glass guy, and I finally had to say, listen, I've been patient. I've let you guys try to fix it because they've already replaced the windshield, still doesn't work. And I said, but I do have to say, my trust in the statements that you're giving me are pretty low right now because, and I said, because in August you put in the wrong windshield, and I drove away Wednesday with another windshield that didn't work. So I had to step up and not create conflict, but just state some facts to move forward on this instead of me, because I'm known to be patient. I'll just be patient. I'll ride this out. I'll assume in good intent. And then I was kind of a line in the sand of, okay, I'm over this. I need the right windshield.
So what'd they do?
So this was Friday at 4 p.m. And he was like, well, you can bring the car right now. And I'm like, well, I'm not bringing the car right now because he thinks it's just a small thing. He's like, if you bring the car right now, I can fix it. I'm like, you mean I'll drive off the lot with a completely fixed car and everything will be working? And then he backtracked. He's like, well, I don't know if everything will be working. So I was like, okay, listen. I'm like, I'm taking the car Monday, or they're coming to pick the car up Monday. They're going to fix it. And then per them, and then they're going to, if it's not fixed, they're taking it straight to the dealership and they're going to figure it out with the dealership. So I'm like, great, you guys figure it out because you're both telling me two different things.
And I love what you bring up with that. And that is assuming positive intent doesn't mean you just sit back and in your head say, I'm just going to let it all be right. You have to communicate. And if it's not every situation is stranger to stranger, right? Where
Right.
there's usually some history. In this case, for you, it was car history, but sometimes it's people history. Somebody who you've had experiences with that have led you down, not to the point of running away, but either you've heard it, seen it, something. And it's good with people to at least set some boundaries or have a conversation to start it up. It's not just an observation of, oh, I'm just going to sit back and assume positive intent and let it
Right.
go. Words do matter. And sometimes it's good to set the playing field by having words.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree because it's easy to sit back and assume positive intent. It's also easy to assume negative intent, to go the opposite direction. Those are like two very easy things to, especially if they're in your natural tendencies. Like, I'm just going to go with that. But I was reading an article of assuming no intent. And I was like, actually, I do like that a bit because you're kind of neutral until you know other information, until you get some other information. And like this situation, I had to assume no intent really and seriously, because if I assume negative intent or positive intent, um, it could go really bad if I assume negative intent and I'm lashing out at everybody and I'm angry at everybody. And then, the positive is like I'm rolling over and just saying, okay, I'll just, whatever, whatever. But one of the things I read was this assuming no intent. And they were talking about how if we assume positive intent or no intent, it opens up for conversations and it opens up for opportunity for learning and relationships and trust
Mhm.
and then experiences. So
Right.
because we're opening it up.
I think it also helps with combating bias, because the only way to combat bias is to hear another perspective, because biases are embedded in what we've experienced. And I love that, because I don't like to have biases. Everybody does. And from they come from experience. They're not always pure, because sometimes people turn bias into anger or can be hurtful to other people. I find my biggest biases are jumping to judgment because of an experience with a certain person, and not, starting with the positive intent. It's interesting. I see 3 degrees. There's the stranger, the person that you just need to be positive, hear them out, and just be neutral in where you stand with them. Then you've got the casual person, casual or close, I guess, the person, right? To what degree? And that one, you're probably going to invest a little bit more time. That's more the communication, the understanding, but then also figuring out to what degree, if you do need to walk away, or having a huge win because you found out something new and the situation wasn't, or the person wasn't what you believe them to be. But then you have the other side where the person really is, not good or bad. And that's usually it can be anything in that case, right? And I
Right.
remember my mother telling me in that situation one time when I was, I think, a young adult, I always saw the best in people. And so even if someone did something horrible to me or had a bad reputation, what have you, I would always say, but they're a really nice person, or I saw them be kind. And it was a situation where somebody really was bad. I don't remember specifically what. And she said, Sandy, there's not good in everyone. And why it's there is not up to you to judge. But there are killers who don't really care that there are evil people in the world. And your philosophy of finding good in everyone isn't going to pan out 100% of the time, which kind of goes with
Yeah.
your dad, because I kind of struggled. That goes counter to what we're saying, but that did remind me in instances that it isn't up to me to do the final judgment on who's good and who's bad, right? Because there are bad people in
Right.
the world. There's times that you do need to walk away, and it's not my job to find the good and make them better, because they have to want to be better too.
I love that there are bad people, like the perspective of your mom and saying, there's always not everybody's good. You
So
can
the
assume, yeah,
And I think of let's talk about the high instance of people that become pen pals with people on death row. They would be that opposite, right? Again, maybe some people on death, but there's a huge population of people that end up marrying somebody they never met, because there is that soft heart that's trying to save them, because they're believing there's good in all people. And I'm going to bring out that good. There's that salvation part. Which ones are good, which ones are bad, which ones are real, I don't know. But
yeah,
that is a human tendency, and I'm using the extreme there, but thinking you can save everyone. And I think it gets back to the person has to want to be saved.
right,
It's their choice, ultimately.
right, yeah. And the person has to want to be good. They
Which is
just,
every day too. It's their choice. We can only control ours. So being
yeah,
neutral and having positive intent, and then letting that person be authentic to themselves, whatever that is, good, bad, or other. But part of it is not jumping to conclusions, and then being smart in the conclusions you draw and how you handle it. But at
Yeah,
least you start with the neutral. You start at a neutral spot.
exactly. And you don't make any assumptions right off the bat, because
Right.
sometimes we just start out making assumptions about people. And that's from, usually it's from our biases, or it's from something that somebody's told us, possibly, which is going to be a little bit of what we're going to talk about next
Right.
podcast, when we talk about sway and how we're swayed by information we have, or what we think we have.
Right. And I think too, bringing this back to the underlying theme of embracing change. When change is happening in your life, you're going to deal with things that need positive intent, really, from the very beginning, because you're dealing with new people and new circumstances, which can make things hard. Back to, if you're embracing change, you really need to embrace this mindset to be open to what's out there, because it's people and situations are new, and you're going to apply your experience to it. It's only natural. I find myself doing that just in moving to Durango. People remind me of other people. They really do. That's, I could almost take almost every relationship I've had, and I can place the person in my life that's very similar to them. It might be the type of job they had, that they ran, they were the head of all the boards, but that almost right away adds a layer of judgment, because I am thinking they are the same person. So
Right.
it's a very thoughtful thing for me to really assume not only positive intent, but that they're their own person, because
Right.
I have put them in this slot. And I really do. I kind of take the cast of characters in my new chapter and align them with the cast of characters in my old. And it's probably one of my bigger challenges, is not to do that and remind myself to give everybody a clean slate and be their own person.
That is so interesting. And I love, isn't that the truth, that we associate that one behavior with something that somebody else did, a different, maybe the same thing and completely different person, but
Right.
we
And
draw these conclusions.
the good and the bad too, because
Yeah.
I almost pick up conversations, or I just jump to assumptions about them that
Yeah.
really aren't them, because I have completely labeled them this,
So
this other
in
person.
this whole car experience this week, so a little bit of perspective. I used to work at a car plant. I
Okay.
have some car knowledge. I'm not, you know, I'm not totally dumb on this topic. And one of the men, I've been dealing with men all week. I'm just going to put it out there. Nothing against men. I'm not making any negative intentions there. But one of them called me honey. And he was like, "Oh, honey." And my reaction was, I see your face. Like, my reaction, and this happened Friday afternoon. So I was a little like done with the week.
Done. Mm-hmm.
And when I got off the phone, I was so upset, like mad. Well, I didn't say anything in the moment because I didn't want to make it about that statement. I wanted to try to get my car fixed. So I didn't escalate that statement. But I hung up the phone and I told my husband, I'm telling him the story, and I'm like, and he called me honey. And I'm sure, like, this morning I'm looking at that statement. I'm like, I'm sure it was positive intentions on his part. But just like you said, I have had experience where that has been a little bit degrading, the tone that people have said it to me. So it just kind of clicked something inside me. And I was just like, and he called me honey. I was so mad.
Right. But those things click where it's
Yeah.
just like, take a step back, because he's not losing any sleep over it, but your emotional level has just gone up and escalated.
Right. And his intention was probably not bad, if I assume positive intentions, but I put the history of it on that comment. So anyway, the things that we have to work through every day.
And I do think the one thing I'll add, we're running out of time, but if you go back to your core values, you will find that those things that are most difficult to assume positive intent are those people that embrace values that are very different than yours, or they grade against your core values. I mean, those are the ones that are really going to set you off too, even more so, because they're so embedded in us. And it's good to know the triggers, good and bad, and to reset your trigger to start at assuming positive intent. Even if that just is the first half an hour of the conversation, it's like a reset button in yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a good challenge for this week
I
is
like it.
to do a reset so that when you're walking into a conversation with
Mhm.
somebody that you've possibly had some history with, you know, try to be intentional about resetting what you are assuming about their intentions.
Mhm. I like it. That is
I
a
think
great
that's a
challenge because it's a really real one too, because you'll be surprised how often in a day this challenge can be deployed.
completely. I'm
Unless you're in
going to
bed sleeping.
continue. I'm going to be dealing with my car some more on Monday.
I
So
can't
I'm
wait
going
to hear
to
about it.
really be very intentional about resetting my thoughts on
And,
this on the conversation.
and this will
So
be perfect. When we do podcast next week, we will have the update on how you deployed the challenge and how it worked for you in your car. So,
yeah, we'll see how it goes. All
all
right. Thank
right.
you,
Good luck,
Sandy. Until next
Amy.
week.
Bye
Thanks.
bye.